downhill. Jamie was always a few steps ahead of us on family walks when we were little, but that began to change around 13. There was still hope that a cure could be found, at least in my mind, but the reality of things was that she was getting sicker and her lungs were not healthy enough to keep going on those walks that we all love so much. Mom and Jamie were beginning to spend more and more time in the hospitals as the medicine became less and less effective. In fact, the journey up the stairs to Jamie's bedroom became too much for her, and she was soon forced to sleep on the downstairs couch. And because the change in temperature between night and day was enough to make her cough, nighttime became scary for the whole family. I had friends, but none of them understood what our family was going through. And if I'm being honest, when my mom would do things like take me to the sports emporium, the last thing I wanted to do was think about the truth of our situation. It was at this point that I began to try substances of abuse for the first time. I remember at the age of 13, I tried smoking weed, drinking alcohol, and Oxycontin. The Oxy epidemic hadn't begun yet, and we actually discovered the existence of Oxycontin by mistake. My friend Craig Shamball's mother actually had a son, Frankie Herr, who was a professional race car driver, and while she was going into the pits to congratulate him, she actually was struck by another race car, and it almost tore her leg off. The bottle that we took was from her. I want to explain at this point, however, the use of substances on my behalf was still quite experimental, and it wasn't an everyday priority like it would be to come in the years that followed. I was approaching my high school years, and this was also about the time girls began to take an interest in me. The timing of all of this stuff couldn't have been worse in retrospect, but that's just how life panned out for me. It began to dawn on me that once she had become wheelchair and oxygen bound, that if something didn't change, she was going to die and I was going to lose my sister. Things changed in my relationship, therefore, at this point. I was no longer a child who only knew how to rival my siblings, but instead I began to slip her attacks and would give her hugs instead. This would further enrage her at some points, but she also became willing to hug me, almost as if she knew that that's what I needed from her. I also began to withdraw from my friendship so I could spend more time at home with her. I can remember sitting in her wheelchair popping wheelies, balancing on the back two wheels, and got pretty good at it too. There was 2 couches in one living room, and a third in the other living room downstairs, and I began to sleep there. The coughing fit she would get into sounded so harsh and painful and suffocating. It must have been an equally terrifying sound to my mom, but she was so strong that she just kept cool the entire time my sister was coughing. I can remember laying there on the couch listening to Jamie and praying to God to give me a sign. In my prayers, sometimes lasting for hours, I would think of a different plant and hold that image as if I would hold that image of the plant in my mind for a few seconds, giving time for God to relay his sign to me. But night after night, no sign came. I can't tell you why I didn't give up hope that God would give me the cure. I guess that's because I had all my eggs in one basket. God needed it to exist so that when the inevitable took place and Jamie did die, there would also exist a heaven. And that's where I'd get to see her again someday. Still, the whole thing made me feel helpless and out of control. That's when I started to create things that were within my control. At first, it was just food. I could choose to eat as little or as much as I wanted. It was always the former. In these years, I also became obsessed with running. I liked the feeling of a runner's high, and truly, it helped me to fight the sadness, which was a result of what was inevitable. The third thing that I did in these trying times was read the Bible. I thought that maybe I'd missed something in the Bible, that a cure lied somewhere in the pages within. I began to read for hours a day, scouring the Holy Manual for answers to all this pain and unfairness. A routine is healthy and necessary for everyone's well-being. but any and everything can be taken to the extreme. I'm not saying that a different routine would have made life in those days any more bearable, but to this day, I speak with a therapist as a sounding board for clarity. The CF was becoming more and more consuming, and her health's decline became a type of terror that I can only describe as absurd in the existential sense. In the quiet moments of prayer, I built my relationship with God up. I didn't understand that you don't make promises with God, and He can't, there's certain things that I didn't understand at that point because I was spiritually still a baby. But as an adult now, looking back, I realized how important those long nights of prayer and intimate conversation with God actually were. So, green light. Thank you for watching.